Okay, this is part one of a two-part video that will look at mimicking a folding pattern in Rhino and Grasshopper. And here you see a structure that was folded from paper. So we're going to look at first creating this in Rhino based on some instructions, and then recreating it parametrically in Grasshopper. And what we'll have at the end of the second part of this video is we'll have a structure that can be completely, or that is completely parametric and can be folded in Grasshopper, as you see here in the viewport. At the end of the first part of the video, we're going to have the two-dimensional pattern that will be parametric, and there's a little bit of control here. As you can see, I can adjust this geometry via this number slider. So we're going to start out in Rhino, creating this pattern in Rhino. So I'm just going to open up a new file, and this model that we made was relatively small. It was 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches. So I'm going to choose small objects, inches, and I'm going to need to close Grasshopper so that geometry disappears. Okay, so I'm going to create an 8.5 by 8.5 square or rectangle. So I'm going to type in the command rectangle, and I'm going to start this rectangle at the origin 0, 0, 0, and my x and y are going to both be 8.5. Okay, so here is my square piece of paper that I began folding with, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the grid here using F7. And the first thing that we did was we divided this paper in half in both directions, vertical and horizontal. So I'm just making sure that my midpoint snap is on, and I'm going to start on a layer. So when you fold, you have to fold on two sides of the paper. So this is going to be my first side, and I'm going to draw the geometry that I need on my first side. So I'm going to draw a line down the middle here, and another line down the middle. The next thing we did was we created some tick marks that divided these squares in half, both on the horizontal line and the vertical line. So I'm going to put those on a layer called tick marks. So I'm going to go ahead and create those tick marks, and I need a tick mark here that divides this square in half. So I'm going to need a line from here to here so I can get that midpoint, and I'm going to go ahead and create that tick mark and just move it from its midpoint to the midpoint of that line. I can erase that guideline that I drew, and I need this on I need this to divide each one of these squares in half. So I'm just going to go ahead and array polar, and this will be the center of my array. My number of items, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, and the angle that I'm going to fill is 360 degrees, which is the default. So I can hit enter, and that gives me those tick marks. The next thing we did is we trimmed these lines back to the tick marks. So I can select those tick marks, type in trim, and then go ahead and select these two lines to trim away. And then the last thing that we did on this side was we created diagonal lines, and I'm going to put those on my first side layer and go ahead and make those. Okay, so that's our first side. Now we're going to work on our second side. So I can go ahead and copy this boundary, which represents our sheet of paper. I can go ahead and copy that over. copy that over 9 inches. And we can start to create the geometry on the second side. So what we needed was the tick marks from the first side. We actually traced those and we did it via paper. So I'm just going to copy those over. And then we created lines from the tick marks to the closest corners. And I'm just going to go ahead and continue doing that. Okay, and then we created horizontal and vertical lines. So these were our two folding patterns. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do these same operations or similar operations and look at how to create these in Grasshopper, and the logic is a little bit different. So I'm just going to move these over. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Grasshopper up and open a new document in Grasshopper. So the first thing we did was we created our rectangle. So I'm going to use some good organization here and a lot of scribbles so that when I come back to this definition, I can see the logic. I can see what I was doing based on the way that the definition is organized and my scribbles, which are actually labels. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the 8.5 by 8.5 rectangle. So creating rectangle. Just going to double click in the Grasshopper canvas and start to type in rectangle. And I'm not choosing the one that's in the hexagon. I'm choosing the one that's in this rectangle. And one thing I should point out is I have turned on under display, I have draw full names turned on. If that was off, the input and the output of this capsule would be abbreviated. So I'm turning that on under display, draw full names. The other thing that I've done is I've turned down the preview plane radius, which is this square grid that you're seeing here. So that can be done under display, preview plane, and I had set that to 1. The default was 8. Okay, so this is going to be 8.5 by 8.5 rectangle. I'm going to double click to create a number slider and type in 8.5, and I'm going to plug that into X and into Y. So you see now I have this parametric rectangle that can be any size, and we're going to leave that at 8.5. Now the next thing that we did was we divided the rectangle in half in 2 directions by drawing a vertical and a horizontal line. What I need to draw those lines is I need the start and end points that those lines were created from. And basically I'm going to need a point everywhere I have geometry touching that boundary rectangle. So we'll see that in a bit here. So I'm going to bring down a scribble, and this is going to create points on the rectangle. And I'm going to do that by dividing this rectangle. Now in Rhino, everything that you draw is considered a curve, whether it's a straight line, a rectangle. It's all based on NURBS curve geometry or NURBS curve algorithms. So everything is a curve. So when I'm thinking of dividing, I'm not thinking of divide rectangle, I'm thinking of divide curve. So I'm going to bring out a divide curve, and I'm going to plug that rectangle in. And now I'm starting to get the points on the rectangle. And I need a total of 8 of them. So I'm going to double click and bring out a number slider set to 8. And now we can see here that I have points everywhere that I need to snap to or draw geometry from. And you can see that here in the rectangle next to it. So what I need to also do is I need to call out those points with some numbers that you'll see will make our life easier when we need to draw geometry from them. So I'm going to bring down a scribble, and this is going to be call out points. And I'm doing that with a point list. And I'm going to plug that in. And this is one of those capsules that has no output. It's the end of the road for this capsule. So what I need to define is the size of the numbers that it's placed on those points. So I can just make those 1 inch. Okay, so now we'll begin to draw our lines, and we're going to start out by drawing a horizontal line. So I'm going to go ahead and bring a scribble down here and label this horizontal. Okay, so when I look at the Rhino viewport, to create this horizontal line, I need to draw a line from point 3 to 7. So I haven't gained access to those points yet. So I need to do that through what's called a list item. Okay, so I'm just going to continue labeling here. So I'm going to bring out a scribble, and this is how I gain access to points. I can rotate this scribble by holding down my control key and just clicking on it and spinning it, because we're going to see this list item is going to become a tall capsule because I need to have access on the output to all 8 of these points. And notice in Grasshopper the 8 points are labeled 0 through 7. All the lists in Grasshopper start with 0. So if I zoom into this list item, I can click on the plus and keep adding until I get 8 outputs. And I will represent the 0, and then I through 7 is 0 through 7 to match these points. Now this is looking for an input. It's looking for it's essentially looking for the 8 points to choose from, and those 8 points are coming out of this divide curve capsule. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, and I'm just going to scoot this over a little bit. I try as much as possible to not have the wires go behind capsules. Eventually it becomes impossible, but again, I try as much as possible. Okay, so this horizontal line is going to go from points 3 to 7. So I just need a line capsule, and it's going to be from 3 is my start point and 7 is my end point, and that creates the horizontal line. And I'm going to do the same thing to create a vertical line. I'm going to bring down a scribble, and this will be my vertical line. And the vertical line goes from point 1 to point 5. So again, I can bring out a line capsule and plug 1 into the start point and 5 into the end point, and that's going to be my vertical line. Now I want to talk a little bit more about organizing this. So I'm going to have a row that moves from left to right that's going to have everything to do with the horizontal line. I'm going to be putting the tick marks on the horizontal line and doing some other things with that. So I will also need some space between here. So I'm going to start to give myself that space. I can select all of these and scoot them down a little bit. This is going to be my main hub. So I can start to also organize things within groups and add color to those groups. So I've selected the text and the list item capsule, and on the keyboard I hold down Control G and it makes a group. By default the color is red, and I'm going to leave that for this one, and I'll show us in a bit how to change the colors of the group. So that was just Control G. So now if I click on this group, it moves everything around inside it. Okay, so the next thing that we need to make is we need to make the tick marks. So go ahead and label that. And let's talk about the horizontal line. We have to think of this horizontal line from start to end. So I plugged in 3 as my start point and 7 as my end point. So start to end, we'll think of the length of this line for right now as 0 to 1. So those tick marks, these here, are going to be placed, this one's going to be placed at a quarter way of the line, so 0.25, and this one at 3/4 at 0.75. So I can do this by evaluating this curve. So I'm going to go ahead and bring out a capsule called Evaluate Curve, and I'm going to plug the line into curve. Remember, it's Rhino, it's NURBS, so lines are thought of as curves. So I can plug that in, and now it wants the distance. This parameter is the distance along the curve. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 0.25 and plug that in. And you can see now that it places a point at 0.25. So now we need the other tick mark at 0.75. So I need another Evaluate Curve, and I need a number slider set to 0.75. And I need to plug in my curve. Okay, and that gives me the other tick mark. Now, right at the moment, I have control over each of these individually, but I'd like them to be parametric or have a relationship with each other, so that when this when this point moves further or closer away from 0.3, this point will also move further or closer away from 0.7. So what I can do, I'm going to leave this at 0.25, and I'm going to set up a little algorithm here using subtraction, so that this will be 1 minus this number slider. So I'm going to bring down a little panel here, and this is just another way to do this versus a number slider, because this is going to be a constant value of 1. And I'm going to bring out a subtraction. Okay, so this is going to be 1 minus whatever this number slider is. And I'm going to organize this a little bit better. And go ahead and plug this in to the parameter. Okay, so now as I move this number slider, you see as they're both in sync, working in unison then. Okay, so now I need to do the same thing on my vertical line to create these tick marks here. So here's my vertical line. I'm going to need a couple Evaluate Curves. Okay, plug this in. Okay, so this will get the number slider plugged into it, and you see that's that point. This is controlling the location now of all three of those. So I need my fourth point up here. So one more evaluate curve, and plug this line into curve, and this should, the parameter input should come from this subtraction capsule. Okay, so not quite well organized yet. I need some more space. Bring all these down. Bring these down to the center. So what I have in the middle here is plugging into the top and the bottom here, and again you'll see we're going to have a horizontal row here and another row down here, keeping with the what I'm doing to the horizontal lines and what I'm doing to the vertical lines. One other thing that I can show you is if I select all of these evaluate curves, there's a little align tool, and there's a reference to Mr. Sparkle. I don't know if any of you watch The Simpsons, but you could Google Mr. Sparkle and The Simpsons. But what these will do is these will align it to the right. So just to show that a little bit better, if I move this out and I want to align these or right justify all of those evaluate curves, I can select them all and then click on that little right arrow. Okay, so this makes my tick marks. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to draw lines from the tick marks back to the corners. So we can do that because these evaluate curves, they give us access to those points. And I'm just clicking on those and you're seeing those highlight in Rhino. So I'm going to start with that first evaluate curve point, which is this one. And I just need to draw lines from that point back to 2 and back to 4. So I'll bring out my line capsule from that evaluate curve, and the end of that is going to be from point 4. And that creates that. So these are our diagonal lines, and I just want to put a scribble up there for that. Okay, now you're seeing the wires are starting to go behind capsules, but when I click on them, they'll highlight in green, and I can trace their way back to their to the input. All right, so that's that diagonal line. I need another diagonal line from that point, from that evaluate curve point back to 2. So I can plug that in to the start and then 2 into the end. Okay. Now I can do the same thing from the horizontal line back to 6 and back to 0. And here's that point that I'm going to draw from. So from there back to 6. And I need one more. And that's back to 0. Okay, so now I'm going to go down to my vertical line and do the same thing, because these lines will originate from the vertical line. So from this point back to 2 and 0, and then from this point back to 6 and 4. Okay, from that point back to 0 and 2. From that same point to 2. Okay, and now our last pair of diagonal lines from from that point to 4 and 6. Okay, so now we have all of those. Now what I can do when I come back later, I kind of want to see my structure or my organization, and I want that to be very obvious. So I can select all the capsules that, I'm going to leave the scribbles out. I'm going to select all the capsules that have to do with creating the horizontal line and all the geometry from it, and I can Control G, and then I can right click over this color filled boundary and go down to color, and I can change the color, and I can do the same thing with my vertical line geometry. And change its color. So now we start to have a well-organized grasshopper definition. Another thing that I'll do is I will highlight the sliders that are the parametric sliders that will alter the definition. And right now we have this one number slider that is altering our geometry. So I can select that and Control G, and if I double click on the boundary, it changes its shape. So I'm double clicking on it, and I like to leave my parameters as circles. So yeah, there you have it. That's creating our geometric folding pattern. So let's look at how to export this definition that was created. So we can export this definition as an image, and I don't need to zoom all the way out to do that, but I wanted to zoom out and just organize this a little bit better. Okay, so I can now make an image of this definition. I can go up to File, and I can go to Export High Res, and there's a zoom setting here. The default is 2, which is the highest I've ever gone. What it does is it defines the resolution. This is like 2 is like a 6,000 pixel image. So for my needs currently, I can do this at 1. I can set the zoom to 1. These values should be default. The hue, the sat, and the val all at 0, and then the A is also set to 0 so that the canvas background is transparent. And another thing that you want to do is make sure that you know where this file is being saved. So you want to click on the 3 dots under the Browse and make sure that you're saving it to a folder that you know where you can find it. And click OK. And you'll get this little DOS window that pops up and creates the image for you. And then you can go and browse and make sure that that image was saved correctly. And there's the PNG image, so it has a transparent background. So now you have your definition exported as an image. Okay, so make sure you check out part 2 of this video. That's going to look at taking this 2D geometry in Grasshopper and creating a 3D folded structure.